All the mics work perfectly with only 100 people in the hall, but you are absorbing a lot of our sound, I think. Today, on the feast of the baptism of Jesus, we mark the official end of the Christmas season. We hear a gospel story concerning two people, Jesus and John. John is one of my favorite biblical figures. He's a person who knows his gifts, both in a positive and negative way. And he really appreciates the mission or obligation he has to use those gifts in his life. In the gospel, the portrait of John is painted with very broad strokes. Depending on which gospel you read, you understand that he's a cousin of Jesus who lived in the desert, who was to prepare a way for the Lord, had strange clothing, and an awful diet. And when Jesus came to the scene, John retreats. He says over and over again, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not worthy to untie his sandal straps. I think there's a great deal that you and I can learn from John. All of us need to recognize what we can do and what we can't do. We really need to have a realistic self-image. And that's not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of self-examination and reflection. And we can err on either side. We can have a poor self-image that doesn't recognize or accept the tremendous gifts that I have. Or we can have an unrealistic picture of what it is we can accomplish. And we have a false image of ourselves. The story is told of a flea who was riding on the back of a huge elephant. They were in a path and there was a tree that had blocked their way. So the elephant trumpeted and moved the big limb off to the side. And the flea said, "Wow, am I strong." Sometimes there's a little bit of a flea in us. Books are written about having positive self-image and healthy self-images. Are we artistic or scientific? Can we play an instrument or feel more at home with a blueprint? But we're talking about more than Dr. Phil can tell us. We're really talking about what God tells us, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are not God. We are not the Messiah. Well, that might seem to you to be an obvious statement. We sometimes might say it with our head, but the way that we feel and live is sometimes that I'm like God. I can control everything. And everything ought to happen the way I want it. But we do have limits, and on the other side we have responsibilities. We need to recognize that whatever gifts and talents we have, they are given to us on a temporary basis. We're simply stewards of them, and our challenge really to use them in a positive way that would serve the other. Flannery O'Connor, a great author from the last century, wrote lots of short stories. She wrote one called The River. And in it, a young boy by the name of Bevel, who's being taken care of by a very elderly babysitter, is taken by the babysitter down to the river, ready to hear this preacher. And the preacher baptizes the kid, plunges him into the river, and plucks him out. Then he said to the kid, "Now you count." God tells us all that we count. We are precious in His sight, and our challenge is to live our lives using the great gifts that He has given us. Yes, we all count.